Sultai Constrictor and blue-white Historic on Luke's side. Remember, the Wrath Capuchin doesn't need cards to be... gives your Historic cards flash.
Yes.
The hard part is that the side, like, what this blue-white flash deck does is it plays creatures as its disruption. I'm not sure the size on the creatures matters as much.
Wrath Capuchin, not much of a blocker in this matchup. In some games, you can catch a Winding Constrictor in combat, but that seems pretty unlikely. And Luke is on the play here, which is certainly where you want to be.
Well, they're both Luke. Sultai's on the play.
Browning on the play. That is a nice last name, by the way.
Servant of the Conduit, the turn 2 play here. Sultai going a little bit bigger as of late. So a bit pair up here. The team of Gebling, Palmer, and Browning are sitting at 8 and 2. That's a tie for 4th place. For the Luke Purcell's team, they are 7, 2, and 1.
You're never paired appropriately when you have a draw. Almost never, so... Yeah. Should be up or down in any round.
Treasure Map, the turn 2 play for Purcell. The Historic deck a little slow. We'll see if Luke can punish him for it.
I like the inclusion of Treasure Map in the Wrath Capuchin builds of this deck. It's a pretty powerful card. The ability to cast it at instant speed and leave up a counterspell in case you need it is pretty nice.
And here's one of the deck's 4 copies of Bristling Hydra. Thanks to Servant of the Conduit, Luke's able to power that one out a turn early.
And Purcell's going to have some good answers to this. There's copies of Settle the Wreckage in the deck. There's 3 copies there, though because there's only 1 Fumigate because the deck's so creature heavy, which is notable.
Memorial to Genius, the play from Luke. And this is actually the kind of deck I want to see some of the memorials in. It enters the battlefield tapped here, which may actually hurt him. However, this land, so new from Dominaria, enters the battlefield tapped, creates a blue mana, 5 mana, tap sack, draw 2 cards. I don't like it in control decks, but I do like it in mid-range, which this seems to be what the deck's doing.
And your 3rd land entering tapped is not the biggest cost. You see some 2-mana counterspells and Essence Scatter, 2 negates, and then also just 4 copies of Seal Away, which against a lot of decks, particularly these green mid-range decks, often you can't actually convert that on turn 2.
Yeah.
So you're casting it on turn 3, and playing a land tapped is totally reasonable in that juncture.
Would be great if it wasn't Bristling Hydra, but it is Bristling Hydra, so he'll swing in for 4, Luke down to 16.
Yeah, the Hydra is a problem for Purcell.
4 more mana from Luke. Another Bristling Hydra, so down to 4 to cast it, goes up to 7.
Well, now Purcell really is going to want to Settle the Wreckage, and Browning can play around that.
Yeah, does he have Fumigate in the deck?
He has 1.
We'll try to find it. Treasure Map will scry. Don't believe he has it just yet.
Purcell may be long on Seal Aways here, and these are not the creatures you want to see if that's the case.
No, and this is where mid-range can be pretty advantaged, the Sultai deck against Historic. You see Luke has both Karn and Teferi in hand, but that's just not going to matter against the current board. So it will be Champion of Wits. There he was hiding over with the spells. It's a 1-of in the deck for Luke.
It's kind of like a spell.
Discards another Memorial and a second Treasure Map. Could see both of those being a bit slow in the face of 2 Hydras.
Yeah, second Treasure Map is definitely a non-starter.
Look over to Luke's hand. Fatal Push. If he can trigger Revolt, that can take down the Champion as a blocker.
And you really don't even have to.
Winding Constrictor, the play. And he's going to cast Fatal Push. He does not have Revolt, but it is still a legal target. So unfortunately, you see Browning knows he made a mistake here. With many cards, if you target something illegally, you get the spell back in your hand. But Fatal Push is not an illegal target. So he unfortunately will lose the card to that blunder.
Yeah,
and swings both.
A little flustered about it, understandably, but he's still very far ahead in this
game.
Yeah,
he might be okay. So 4 damage will come in, Purcell down to 12. And he'll have to say go.
It's not like the Fatal Push is good in the matchup.
No, and now the only way he'll truly get punished here, I think, is if Purcell has that 1-of Fumigate. And even then, it doesn't cost that much.
It's not like he missed damage. He can't use the Fatal Push for that purpose. He lost a Fatal Push, and it's just a bad card.
Upkeep, Luke scries with Treasure Map, makes Treasure Cove, gets 3 treasures. But still, I think he was looking for Settle the Wreckage. He'd left up 4 mana, but I do not believe he found it.
Because Treasure Cove does not untap when it transforms, Purcell will not yet be able to draw an extra card with that looking.
Yeah. And he's decided to bluff, I think, the Settle the Wreckage. His other option would be to make the Karn in his hand. Now, because he has 3 treasures in play, Karn could have made a 3/3 blocker, but on this board, 3/3 doesn't do very much.
It would be a 4/4, but even that's
4/4.
not very good. He has 3 treasures, it's a 4th artifact. But Browning has assembled Constrictor plus Bristling Hydra and has 7 energy in reserve, so these can have 5 toughness at the ready.
And Luke, this bluff actually is paying off. Luke not going to swing the whole team, just swings 1 Servant and a Bristling Hydra.
And I think because the Hydras can outsize the artifact token, this makes sense for Purcell to be patient on that.
All right, this swing would be for 6. It would send Purcell down to 6. And cat's out of the bag here on Settle the Wreckage. It looks like Seal Away may be going for Luke. Browning, one of his remaining cards is Walking Ballista, so he doesn't actually have to deal too much damage as he puts Purcell down to 6.
Yeah, especially with the Winding Constructor already on the battlefield.
Exactly. And you see Luke has decided to start pumping the brakes here. He knows he has lethal next turn. He had another Winding Constrictor, Walking Ballista, and Glint Sleeve Siphoner in hand. He holds on to all of them and just sends the turn back to Luke.
Yeah.
Who now uses Treasure Cove to try to find a sweeper. But Thopter Arrest is not going to do that.
One's a bit shy of the mark. And he can represent the Settle the Wreckage again, but at this point, Browning just has lethal multiple times over.
And here is Teferi. Teferi is the Planeswalker for Luke. Will draw a card, untap 2. He drew into Essence Scatter, a great card for 2 extra mana. However, he's just under too much pressure.
It is neat that these treasure tokens allow Purcell to continue to bluff Settle the Wreckage, but at some point, your time runs out on the bluff.
Yeah, and Luke should be able to both respect Settle the Wreckage and attack for lethal this next turn.
Yep. Not even hard. One of these Hydras is lethal with that energy in reserve.
Yeah. So you go back to Luke, and because there's an onboard Teferi, it's likely that Luke will just have to call. He doesn't really... Browning doesn't want Purcell just to untap with that Planeswalker again. And here's a swing. Bristling, it looks like same as the last turn. Bristling Hydra. Will he go for both Hydras?
Both Hydras seem strange. I mean, we know that Browning has it locked up.
Well, he will swing both. Settle the Wreckage would get him here, but Purcell doesn't have it. Instead, he will attempt to seal away a Hydra.
Yeah, make him pay the energy.
Luke will give it Hexproof. And Purcell picks up the cards. Game 1 goes to Sultai Constrictor and Luke Browning. So, game in the bag for that team. On the legacy table, Bob Huang gets game 1 with Delver, so it is even. But I think, Brian, right there, this is something you can see in these blue-white mid-range or these flash-style decks. They have a lot of synergy, but their card quality can be a bit lower. And at that point, you know, it was too fancy. Luke curved out with creatures, and Brian curved out with creatures, and Purcell wasn't able to do much about it.
Going low on Fumigate is absolutely going to cost you points in matchups with large creatures.
Right. It felt like when we look at blue-white approach versus Constrictor, what we always will see is that approach has to fumigate, but when it fumigates, it gets to win.
Right.
Purcell is not playing as many fumigate because he has these mid-range creatures, and I don't feel like any of the mid-range creatures mattered. It was still fumigate or bust.
Yep, and this is where the Wrath Capuchin plan, it looks really cool, it's powerful in some matchups, but this is just not one of them.
All right, we'll see if Purcell can adapt his deck for the matchup via sideboard. We'll be back with that in just a minute. Back here, Sultai Constrictor from Luke Browning versus Luke Purcell's Historic deck. Browning was the winner here, but no help from his teammates. Ben Nikolich, as we've seen many times over, takes game 1 on the modern table with Jeskai control.
That would be a rough one for the team to lose.
You know, this looks really great for a team of Haung, Nikolich, and Purcell. A lot of our day 2 teams are playing humans in the modern seat.
Yes, yeah. Once Ben Nikolich gets into this position, once you stop having to worry about playing the Bloodbraid Elf decks, there's a lot of affinity, a lot of humans. Great spot for Jeskai.
Keep an eye on this team. On sideboard here, the blue-white historic plan from Luke Purcell doesn't seem to be pretty effective against Constrictor. Now, what he's done is in the sideboard, Ryan, he can change his deck to look more like blue-white control.
Yeah, so there's actually kind of 2 transformational packages here. So we'll go over the full sideboard first. There's 4 History of Benalia, 2 Forsake the Worldly, 2 Glimmer of Genius, 2 Fumigate, 2 Negate, an Essence Scatter, an Ixalan's Binding, and a Torrential Gearhulk. So the one package you have is going heavy on History of Benalia and becoming more aggressive.
That's like more mid-range, more flash.
Right, and you would do that if your opponent either had small creatures or was not trying to have removal spells in kind of a controlling mirror. Now, Browning's just going to outsize all of that, so you're not into that. On the other side of things, you have the ability to become more of a control deck, and we're going to see the extra Gearhulk, those 2 more Fumigates, probably Essence Scatter, Ixalan's Binding, and Purcell's going to take a more controlling approach to this matchup.
Right, so he's this mid-range deck where he's half control, half flash. So against a control deck, he'll become all a complete flash deck, and against something like Sultai Constrictor, he'll try to become a complete control deck.
Exactly.
Now, because his sideboard's only 15 cards and the main deck's only 60, I still think he's going to be a pretty medium build of blue-white control. For example, these 2 Glimmers, they're the only 2 in the 75. It's not 2 main, 2 board. He just gets 2 Glimmers. He gets up to 3 Fumigate and 3 Settle the Wreckage after sideboard. So that's actually pretty good. But then you look at some of these other removals, and it's just, you know, only 2 Essence Scatter. Some of the numbers are lower than I would want them to be.
And that tends to be what happens when you have a transformational package or you try to cram 2 strategies into one, is you're never optimally performing either, but you have the ability to control your role, which is the strength.
Now, on Luke Browning's side for Sultai Constrictor, there's actually a lot that he would normally do against blue-white control. We see 3 Thrashing Brontodon, which is pretty great in the matchup. A lot of Luke's removal is enchantment-based, so we can buy those back. 2 Arguel's Bloodfest. Don't want to talk about how that's good against control. 2 Duress, 2 Negate. I like all 9 of those cards in the matchup.
Yep.
2 Fatal Pushes probably out. 2 Vraska's Contempt. You can make an argument for it. There are Planeswalkers.
Pretty medium, but it's not bad. It's not terrible.
Yeah. Out on the Cartouche of Ambition, but also Carnage Tyrant.
Very interested in Carnage Tyrant. You have to worry about Settle and Fumigate, but it's a singular card that demands one of those.
Which means we could be seeing up to a 10-card sideboard for Luke Browning in a matchup that already looks pretty good for him.
Yep. And in the main deck, you have some removal spells that don't really line up. He even has a main deck Cartouche of Ambition. That one's certainly getting out, but he's got a Move and a Craving, a couple Fatal Push.
I'm not even sure how much I like Hadana's Climb in this matchup.
Yeah, certainly not 3 copies. It is kind of a second threat that you can commit to the battlefield, and it doesn't get swept with the sweeper necessarily. So it's all right. You don't really want to draw multiple copies, though.
Yeah, look at Luke's list. He's got 27 creatures, 10 spells in the main. I'm not sure I like any of the spells in the matchup. I just want all creatures.
Yeah, the spells are not ideal. He's on fully 4 Bristling Hydras, which is certainly very good in this matchup.
So game 2, both players on 7s as we started off. Luke not going to make any plays. He's really going to look like a control deck. Just needs to hit his land drops.
And for Browning, this Sultai Constrictor deck, usually looking to start on turn 2. We'll find out exactly what he has.
Yeah, and because he's on the draw, this Essence Scatter in Purcell's hand is going to tag just about anything Browning goes for, unless that anything is Arguel's Bloodfast.
Yeah, because Negate's not very good against your deck, and there's 2 mana up. I like this play a lot. And the Bloodfast sticks.
It sticks. Luke plays the Memorial to Genius and holds up Essence Scatter again, hoping that Luke will play a creature, but I think at this point he's telegraphing it pretty well. I don't know that Luke will play into it.
Well, now Browning's picked up a Duress, so he's on easy mode. Well, if his mana was
That's
better, he might be.
So he doesn't, you're right, he picked up the Duress, but his land for the turn is just blue-green.
Yeah, Hinterland
Harbor. So here's Glensleeve's Siphoner. He doesn't get to Duress first because of what you mentioned there, and that means the Essence Scatter will hit Siphoner.
Yeah. Little unfortunate with the mana, also because Arguel's Bloodfast is a little black mana hungry.
Right. Back over to Browning. We will go 4 lands in play for Purcell. Do see Woodland Cemetery, so now two black mana up for Browning.
Yes, that is a much better position.
And now that means duress can happen. Let's take a look. Settle the Wreckage was the only option.
And 4 lands otherwise?
3 into gear.
Oh,
three
a Torrential
planes,
Gearhulk. Yeah, okay.
3 basic planes and a Torrential Gearhulk.
Torrential Gearhulk, not a bad one, but a little bit off.
Yeah, so it means that Purcell does not have a play next turn. He has on turn 1 6 lands. He can make the Gearhulk or use the Memorial. Not exciting, though.
Don't really want to use that Memorial until you've leveraged the Gearhulk. Though Browning really not on the battlefield.
If Browning's follow-up to this duress is just activating Bloodfast, Purcell can beat that.
Oh, yeah.
Looks like, though, he can do better. He'll make Servant to the Conduit and hold up Blossoming Defense.
It's not terrible.
And another basic planes for Purcell.
Yeah, this is not the way you draw it up. And this is kind of, like, I suppose you wouldn't be playing any spells over lands. I mean, this deck is certainly very land hungry, but you do wish that your deck was heavier on Glimmer of Genius because you need to be top decking effects like that.
And I do like what's happened for Browning here. His draw for the turn was Bristling Hydra, and this will give him an opportunity to sneak it in under that Torrential Gearhulk. I'd be surprised if he didn't take it.
Yes. You do have to be concerned about the Gearhulk getting back that Settle the Wreckage at some point.
Swing in with Servant to the Conduit for Browning. Purcell takes 2. And we're going to see Bristling Hydra. He had 1 draw step to dodge and didn't have to. Says go. Now, if Luke had land 5 in hand, he probably wouldn't have attacked with Servant. He could have blood fasted. But without that extra mana source, figures that's fine. He'll pass. Purcell plays that 6th land and passes. Both players know what's going on.
Yeah.
Second Bloodfast for Browning. Not going to do too much, as that was his pickup for the turn.
Yep.
So there's a 5/6 basically in play. Ryan, there is a Blossoming Defense in Browning's hand. So if he attacks with Hydra, he can make it a 5/4 with energy, make it a 7/6 with a Blossoming Defense. It would defeat the Gearhulk in combat.
Were it not settled with the Wreckage.
Yeah, so what seems most likely here is that Luke will settle the Wreckage with the Gearhulk, and Browning will just make a second Bristling Hydra and be okay with it.
Yes.
And we'll see the first half of that.
Going forward, second Hydra should have pretty good attacks.
Right, and as long as players are just trading board position here, exchanging threats and removal while building up mana, how this will play out for Browning is at some point he'll untap and just draw 3 cards with Bloodfast and then turn the game on its head.
And understandably, Browning finds a swamp with the Settle. He's going to want that black mana for the Bloodfast. Certainly don't need more than 5 green mana, and the deck's very light on blue anyway, so second blue generally doesn't matter either. Not to mention that the Servant already has second blue covered.
And there's that second Bristling Hydra, so Browning up to 8 energy.
And the question, can Purcell draw a spell? He does. He draws a Cast Out, but that one is not good against Bristling Hydra.
It can take care of Arguel's Bloodfast, which he's going to try to do. Now, we know that there's a second one in Browning's hand, so this is actually not going to solve the problem.
Right. It feels like a very minor win, and not only is it very minor, but it also is trivial because of that second Bloodfast.
Right. Were there not a second one, this would be a very, very powerful play.
It wouldn't solve the problem of being relevantly behind on the battlefield, but it would stop that from snowballing.
And to take an opportunity, it is Verdurous Gearhulk for Luke Browning. And distribute 4/1/1 counters. This will help that Bristling Hydra go to work. He's turning it into a 6/5.
I like making the Gearhulk a 6/6 also.
Yeah.
That's what he goes for. The Servant can't really be sized in a way where it matters against the Gearhulk.
But now both creatures can attack through the Gearhulk.
Right. The Bristling Hydra just has a very good attack now, and the Verdurous Gearhulk on the following turn will also have a very good attack.
So Hydra swings in. Luke going to cycle a land and then likely take the hit. He does. And some good news for Browning. His teammate Justin Gebling, after losing game 1, takes both sideboard games against Bob Haung, wins the legacy match, which means that Browning, the game he's ahead in right now, if he wins it, he'll win the round.
And it looks promising. Purcell picked up a walking ballista, and that's going to be way too small to make a meaningful impact here.
Well, that just feels like a difference between historic and control. If we were seeing an actual blue-white control deck, there wouldn't be walking ballistas anywhere in the list. Because Purcell is a mid-range deck, historic, that's trying to become a control deck, its removal spells end up being things like walking ballista, things that are good at playing both roles but not excellent at playing either. And especially in this matchup against black-green, you're lucky if walking ballista ever actually turns into a removal spell.
Right, and post-sideboard, Purcell is heavy on things like Fumigate and Settle. He has 3 copies, can't go too much more, but you would see more counter spells in a blue-white control deck. You'd be heavier on Disallow, only 2 copies available for Purcell. Getting that in front of the Bristling Hydra can be very important.
Makes a 3/3 walking ballista and passes. We see Purcell down to 12, back to Browning's turn. He has a second Bloodfast and hasn't even had to go for it yet.
Yep. Yeah, just firmly in the driver's seat on the battlefield, and then has a Bloodfast kicker.
Yeah, 2 great attackers, thanks to that Gear Hulk last turn. He'll swing with both. Put some pressure on Purcell. There's a Blossoming Defense in Browning's hand. We do have to look out for that one. It can really mess up this combat. Purcell down to just 1 card in hand. We're going to see 2 blocks. Walking Ballista on Bristling Hydra, Torrential Gear Hulk on the Verdurous Gear Hulk, and the last card in Purcell's hand is going to be the Seal Away. He'll attempt to seal away Verdurous Gear Hulk.
Yeah, that's not going to fly.
Browning's going to have none of that. I think we'll see Blossoming Defense on the Gear Hulk. That's going to counter the ability on the Seal Away. Now, before the creature has hexproof, Luke's going to make sure that Walking Ballista deals it damage so that the Gear Hulks at least trade.
Yep, heads up move by Purcell there, does everything he can, though. Still going to have to worry about the Bristling Hydra going forward.
Yep, trade happens, no damage, but Purcell out of creatures, out of cards in hand. Browning still has, I believe, 4 cards in hand and a Bloodfast he hasn't cast yet, so he'll do that.
And then exchange for Browning, it was a 2 for 3. He got a card off of Purcell there. It was Ballista, Gear Hulk, cast, Steal Away for 1 card, just the Verdurous Gear Hulk, and plus the Blossoming Defense.
Yeah, but even the Gear Hulk, 2 of its Gear Hulk's counters are still on the battlefield, on the Hydra.
Yeah, it wasn't even the full card.
6 mana, going to be getting rid of that Memorial for Purcell.
Looks like a Thopter Arrest in the holdings, but Browning ready with 2 activations of Bristling Hydra.
Treasure Map and Thopter Arrest. But you're just too far behind the black-green deck.
Yeah. And Browning, if he wants, actually has a lethal attack on the following turn. You currently have 8 power on the battlefield with 2 Hydra activations against Purcell at 10.
He'll Thopter Arrest.
And that's why you see Thopter Arrest on Servant of the
Conduit. Right.
Which is not ideal.
Browning will start drawing cards off Bloodfast. He should be able to walk this one in.
Another Gear Hulk or a Blossoming Defense would do it on this turn.
Right, we see 8 damage on the board. Now 9 because he picked up Aether Hub. Brings that to the 3rd Hydra activation. Don't think he has the 10th. We might have to do this over 2 turns.
You get a look with the Bloodfast.
Okay.
Not for Gear Hulk, but for Blossoming Defense anyway.
Sure.
You get 2 looks for Blossoming Defense.
He'll draw a card off Bloodfast, see if he can hit it.
Or Walking Ballista.
Walking Ballista works. That should be the point of damage he was looking for.
And with Purcell tapped out, there's no reason not to shove.
Yeah, shoves. This is 6. If he can pump it twice, well, about 3 times, that's 9 damage. Purcell to 1. And Walking Ballista seals it up. Luke Browning 2-0 with Sultai Constrictor. He is your winner in what looks to be a great matchup and a great performance on his side. Paired with that win from Justin Gebling, and the team improves to 9-2.